Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Science of Fitness podcast. We have Paula Hendel on the podcast today. Paula, welcome.
Thank you.
Very excited to have you here. And in particular for us, the last couple of weeks and months, we've, I guess, been open to the world of women's health. From a soft perspective, we've just been all about exercise and quality exercise science and trying to bring that to the masses. Personally, as a practitioner in working with females, as I've discussed with you before, I couldn't, I guess, solve problems that maybe were being presented in front of me without diving into women's health. And that sort of was the budding process of this. And then as you do, when you start to look in and you come across all these different, experts and personalities in the space, you meet wonderful people like yourself. And so here we are. But before we go into, I guess, your work currently in the space of women's health, let's hear about your journey, your story. You've got quite an interesting one and been sort of across all ends of the spectrum. So, from the beginning for you, what got you into, I guess, health first and foremost, and then ultimately getting you to where you are now as a physiotherapist, as a practitioner, specialist in women's health, and also someone that really emphasizes exercise and training for females?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I can't even remember a time that I wasn't interested in health and wellness. That was just innately in me, I think. So as a kid, I was just always into sport and activity. So at school, loved health and PE, but also did all the sciences. So initially went in and did a human movements degree, just because at the time I was playing high-level sport. Yeah. I had a scholarship at the QIS, so I was training under strength and conditioning coaches and sports scientists, and did some prac there, and just really, I couldn't think of doing anything else other than being involved in sport.
Yeah. What sport were you
Basketball.
playing?
Basketball
Cool.
was my sport, till all the injuries hit. So did an exercise science degree, so that was a long time ago now. And I guess back then it's not as big as it is now, so there just wasn't really the work opportunities other than working in a gym, I guess, which there's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't stimulating, I guess, enough for me at the time. And they had put out the first year of the postgraduate master's physiotherapy course at the time. So I looked into that and went down the path of doing physio, which I'd kind of always thought about doing, but, didn't get straight into it. So started my exercise science degree and just kept going. So then did physio. And one of my pracs was in women's health. And again, I think I probably started physio thinking I would do something to do with sport, but had one of my placements at one of the major obstetric hospitals in Brisbane. Yeah. So, got into women's health and spent some time there doing the exercise side of that, because with my background, they just threw me straight into, pregnancy exercise classes and postnatal classes. Yeah.
And was that really like intimate pelvic floor control stuff? Was that like, let's get you lifting, or not lifting weights, but squatting, lunging, moving a little bit more? How intimate was it?
It's so different now to what it was back then. Okay. So, in the 2 decades, I guess, that I've been doing this, there's been finally science and research emerging actually looking at women. Whereas back when we first started, I don't know if it's any different now, but in the undergraduate physio degree, there's very little really on women's health, which is crazy. We certainly don't do internal pelvic floor assessments or anything as part of the undergraduate degree. And even when I graduated, we were doing courses, but there wasn't much research behind it. It was almost like someone needs to get in there and see what's going on and just have a look. And it's just evolved a long way since then. So in my placement, it was mostly just movement, really. Again, there wasn't even that much science on what is safe for pregnant women in terms of exercise, what is safe for postnatal women. There was certainly no guidelines in terms of returning to exercise. So we were kind of just feeling our way through, to be honest. So when I graduated, I wanted to get a broad range of different things. I did orthopedics, I did cardiac health and post major surgery, ICU, so a whole lot of different stuff, which was great. And then I actually went out into private practice on my own because I just saw this big need for more specialised physios treating women. So that's basically how I got into women's health and stepped away from sport and athletes.
Yeah, as it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, right. I guess let's take a step back and for the layman to understand, physiotherapy is a pretty versatile profession. And a lot of us, and a lot of the people listening think physio, sore shoulder, sore back, sore neck. Go to the physio, musculoskeletal, that's it. There's layers. You just mentioned some of them, cardiac, respiratory sort of stuff. You've obviously touched and worked in that sort of space. I guess, what have you taken from those specialties? And, let's say, for example, some of the cardiac type stuff. What have you taken from that physio-wise and noticed it's applicable to the everyday musculoskeletal, women's health type of space, if at all?
So much.
Yeah.
It's a bit like I have huge respect for GPs. Like anything could walk in and they need to have a little bit of an idea of what's going on. It can be a bit the same with physio, especially our rural physios. We're lucky here in the city where we can go, oh, I don't do that. I don't treat ankles. I don't treat this.
Yeah.
But just having an understanding of the disease processes and all the different things that can go on. It's interesting as well when we study physio, and medicine is the same. The systems are all compartmentalized. You either treat cardiac care, or you're a gastroenterologist, or gynecologist, and we just can't treat like that. We have to be looking at the whole person. So I feel very lucky that I have worked in a lot of the different specialties, so that when someone's coming to me, maybe for pelvic floor or whatever it is, we can look at the whole person and all of the symptoms and look at where is the root cause of dis-ease or unwellness.
Yeah.
It's not just looking at their pelvic floor.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And did doing an undergraduate in exercise science, coming from an exercise background, did that influence the way you practiced? Did you find you have a bias to movement and exercise? Or is that something you did and then it was a stepping stone?
Probably. Yeah. I think when you've got that background, and it's a passion for me as well, you can't, and the research is just undeniable that exercise is just the best medicine of all. But I think I almost find it hard to understand how you could practice as a physio without having a good understanding of exercise and exercise science. And I guess that's where I probably sit right in that gap of being able to cross over, because in an ideal world, we'd have people in the fitness industry working hand in hand with physios and vice versa, so that as a physio, we feel comfortable passing our patients over when they're ready to move into the fitness industry or the wellness space. But maybe also there's a bit of who's claiming what areas as well. Yep. And it just doesn't have to be like that.
No, not at all.
So, but certainly it helps in terms of when we get into the older demographic as well. I'm in an age bracket now where I'm working with a lot of women who are perimenopausal, and by the time you get to that age, you've usually had certain things go on with your medical history or your health. So to be able to have an understanding of that broad range of things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And not be going, oh, well, you need to see that person for that and that person for that. And
the person turns into feeling like they've got something wrong with them.
That's right.
Hang on, let's just get clarity.
100%, because they end up with just this shopping list of conditions that they have that they're identified with. So it's nice to be able to break all that down and go, well, what are you actually feeling? Like, what is going on for you?
It's funny from the exercise end of the spectrum, and I've almost tried to deliberately keep myself out of leaning into physio and rehab to an extent, yet so much of the work I do has ended up in that space, but not acutely diagnostically right at the very start of someone's problem. But working with the team downstairs now, we're so lucky we can integrate it and actually work in that sense. But my calling is for more exercise science practitioners, ex-phys, to have a better understanding of disease processes and diagnosis of injury and everything else. It's not to be the diagnoser, but it's to be able to have that conversation so that the physio can trust and so forth. And, I look at it all, and physio and ex-science and ex-phys to mix together. Maybe there's a calling to the university to draw a doctorate around it, and it should be as hard or as highly regarded as a medical degree. Maybe less the pharmacology from medicine, but maybe much more in the molecular science from an exercise and I guess metabolic process, disease process, and understanding that because it's critical. And as you said, it's the evidence is undeniable. Exercise helps, but the wrong exercise at the wrong time, or maybe the right exercise at the wrong time, could be also one of the worst things that someone does. So there's such a process there.
Absolutely. And with anything like that, if you're working in a traditional physio clinic, we're so limited by space, equipment, things like that. So and
even the patient's perception.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And we want them lifelong in either a health facility or somewhere where they're continuing on. It's not you're going to exercise for this period of time and then you're done.
Complete tick.
And you're fine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong process.
How long did it take for your understanding to go, that's it? If we sort of summarize what you've just sort of said, we've agreed upon, was there a particular point where you're like, this has to be one and the same? We have to be looking at the problem that's presenting, zooming out, addressing a cause, and then putting in a system in place that has pillars to address the cause as we work slowly to solve the problem. The patient's motivation's high because the problem persists and solving that problem is great. But then actually, was there a key moment, or did that just gradually grow and grow and grow and now you can't not practice like that?
I think it just continues to grow. The more you know, the more you realise you don't know.
Yeah.
So
not the first to say that on this podcast.
That's true, though. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. And I think that's important. They're the health professionals I would want to see, to be honest, that are saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Your, if you will, practice, not necessarily in a physio sense, but I think both in the exercise sense and the populations you're working with now, you've sort of brought in, for lack of a better term, holistic. I think it's been butchered by marketing, but there is value in understanding what that means, as you've just touched on, neuro, psychological, biopsychosocial, that whole principle. That's become a big part of your practice and then I guess what you're working with in the populations you work with. Again, what took you down that route, particularly to lean into a bit more of the yoga, meditation, breathwork type of space? And when did that come about? Was there key moments, or again, was it gradual?
Yeah, I mean, it was. It's a combination of things. So again, I feel very lucky with my experiences through high school, being affiliated with the Queensland Academy of Sport. So we were under sports psychologists as well. So mindset was always instilled in me, which I probably took for granted for a really long time because I grew up with it as a teen. It was just in me and I thought that was just normal. Came to realize it wasn't. So that side of it was always there. And I've always been the kind of person to, have these motivational quotes, and I've got them on my kids' desks and things like that, to the point where they, take the piss a little bit now because that's just what I'm like. Mum drops us off and gives us a motivational speech before we walk into school.
I love it.
But I had a big life event. My husband actually suicided when my kids were 2 and 4. So he was very unwell, obviously, leading up to that. And just watching that experience, I could really see through avenues we went down in terms of his healing and trying to get him better, that it wasn't just one specialty that was going to be able to do that. It wasn't just the old school, there's something chemically wrong in the brain. There's the mental aspect, the emotional aspect, the trauma from past experience, which we know now from the ACEs study that people that have had childhood traumas are much more likely to have poorer health outcomes. None of that can fit into the basket of one specialty. And I went down a big rabbit hole when he was unwell. I certainly went down a deeper rabbit hole after because I just have the brain that needed to understand it. I just needed to understand what takes someone to that point. Again, someone like me who's come from this strong mindset approach, why would someone do this?
Yeah, wow.
So that definitely took me down more the spiritual path, and there was just something in me that needed to explore that. So I went and did my yoga teacher training. I did a big pilgrimage to India. And as we've talked about, that just takes you down a deeper and deeper and deeper path. and then started reading up on the work by Bessel and Peter Levine and all of the trauma and somatic therapies, and actually just intuitively made sense to me. So when I stopped working for a while at that point, but when I went back to work, I just completely looked at my patients in a different way. You know, they might come in even just as a new mum with back pain, but you could look at them and go, wow, what's going on in your life? Like what's happened to you before? What's your story? And when you give people a chance to speak and just talk about their life, which most people don't, because people are quick to jump in and talk and tell their stories. But when you stop and just give people silence, which is a big coaching skill, to not speak, people keep talking and they tell you more and more and more. And I then figured that is actually when they tell you what is wrong with them. It's not me as the health professional.
Yeah.
They're telling me what's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's so powerful, and I've been going for 12 years and it's taken me a little while to understand that. 90% of the time the patient or client or person will present, tell you what's wrong, and also almost come up with a solution as to do it. And you're just holding space. You're facilitating an environment that, one, they can identify, and then two, actually be able to turn up and do the work, which is ultimately what we need to do. Really interesting. You mentioned spiritual. It pops up quite often, particularly with experienced practitioners. They might use different words, energy, I don't know, vibe, for lack of a better term. It's there. We are yet to quantify it. It's quantum physics, maybe something in there. Maybe one day we'll get a number to it and be able to put literature and hard evidence. But at the end of the day, it exists and it's something people feel. You walk into a space, you work with a practitioner, they just have a vibe and it matches. It's amazing that, you know, do you think it would have taken such a significant life event to make you consider this as a professional? Or do you think you were going to head that direction anyway, just with this need of understanding and realizing we get to a point where there is nothing quantifiable, but it's a thing to feel and let people understand that they've got to sort of work with the space that's provided.
Yeah, I mean, it's a catalyst, that's for sure, when you have a big life event. But I think things like the advances in pain science are heading that way. When we're starting to have to change people's understanding and narrative around, I have pain, so there's something physically wrong at the tissue level. That's a tiring thing to keep doing.
Yeah. I mean, I had one today where, and my mate, he was diagnosed with a bulging disc. We know what's wrong. It's like,
and
what now?
Yeah.
We can go epidurals, jabs, etc. There might be a surgical intervention that might work. The evidence also says it might not.
Yeah.
What now?
Yeah.
Nothing changes from an
You
approach.
might scan my back and I have a bulging disc too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have no pain.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a big evolution in science that's starting to open up a lot of practitioners' eyes to, okay, there's more to health and wellness and well-being than, just the physical. It's undeniable, really.
Yeah.
So I think just the level to which you delve down that path, because there's still the perception of maybe it is a bit woo-woo. And often it's not, though, right? Like there's so much science. If you actually go and look into it, there is so much science behind a lot of this stuff. And certainly ancient wisdom traditions have been saying so much of this stuff for a long time. It's just that now science is starting to give us the evidence that we seem to have for everything we do.
Yeah, with maybe not a mechanistic explanation, but a causation type effect exists.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And it sort of comes back to the exercise and the movement side of things, which, you've obviously had a lot of experience. Women particularly that feel disconnected from their bodies, stress, societal pressure, past experiences, as we've talked about. I guess, what are some practical ways that they can navigate that? Try and build momentum, positive attitudes about their body, positive attitudes to physical activity, but also, and I talk about it in inverted U theory all the time, not go too far. Because we've worked with a lot of people, I'm sure you have too, where I need to run, do gym, and get to Pilates and do something else in a day.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, whoa. That's too far. It's over the other side of the U where it's just as unhealthy as doing nothing. What, I guess, are the majors from balancing that for particularly the female population?
There's a lot of questions you've asked there.
Loaded you up. I can't help myself. Pick and choose. It's like a buffet.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, those people that I reckon they're probably the younger demographic too, that are wanting to run and do this and do Pilates and all of that. And my question to them is why? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What is your definition of wellness? I think that's really important.
I like that.
I will answer the question of connection to self and embodiment, because I see that every single day in my clinic, that so many, not just women, like people are so disconnected to their bodies. And it's because they're all up in their head and living in this, I call it conditioning, this programming. So our brains are just a collection of our past experiences. And until we can learn those skills in yoga, meditation, whatever practice you want to use, where we can step back and witness that, cultivate the witness and watch what it is, we will never be able to separate ourselves from that programming. So we need to be looking at, what are the thoughts that are constantly on my mind? What are my beliefs? What are my beliefs around wellness? What are my beliefs around my pain, my body, this disease I have? Because we can't even begin to move towards wellness until we know what people's beliefs are. I had a perfect example of that yesterday. One of my patients who was referred for period pain. And I would argue that the pain, in inverted commas, that she was experiencing is actually normal. It's just that she has a fear of it. So it's being ramped up. But the lack of connection to her body was just outrageous to me. Just this belief that when she has her period pain, she has to be still. She wouldn't touch her body. Just that fear of movement will make it worse. Touching my belly will make it worse. So starting with, what are their beliefs? We can't do anything until we understand that that's their belief. Because if I send her home with, let's do some movement, let's get your pelvis moving, let's do some touch on your belly, she's not going to do that. She's like, that physio's whack. Like she's going to make my pain worse. What is she thinking?
None of this stuff helps. I avoid it.
Absolutely. So even simple things in that case, like physically having her physically touch her body, connect with your body, put your hands there. What do you feel? What's underneath your hands? Bring awareness to their breath. Can you feel when you're breathing? Yeah. And some people are like, what do you mean? What do I feel when I'm breathing?
And that was going to be one of my questions. Like, how does someone present, or how can someone consider that for themselves? That's a pretty practical example. Yeah.
Well, my most common thing that I would give someone to do as homework, I suppose, to use the term homework, which I don't like. But it's just,
is that a memory connotation with that? Maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Can you just spend 1 minute, 2 minutes, sometime today, sitting in, we call it a sacred space at Vera. Create a sacred space at home where you feel safe, and just be with your body in stillness. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What emotions are present? Because too many of us are just busy and doing and numbing and scrolling on our phone, coffee in the morning, wine at night. Just never in stillness.
Yeah.
And you can't connect with your body until you can do that. And there's reasons people do that. Sometimes if you are in legitimate, really terrible pain, or you've been through traumas, you don't want to be with your body, because that's a scary place to be. But to move towards wellness, we need to move to those places.
Yeah. And let the system connect. You know, it's all one.
Yeah.
And life takes us away from that, as you just mentioned, all those things.
Yeah.
Let's talk male patients, and I guess approaching the same situations that present themselves that you've seen. Is the approach different? Like, the outcome, the approach is probably the same, but I guess narrative-wise, conversation-wise, do you notice a difference, or is it very much the same?
It's interesting to discuss, again, beliefs. So particularly around work life, how many hours someone needs to work, how much money maybe a man needs to bring in, and that's driving the belief that he needs to be working, which is incredibly stressful, so he can't get to gym or exercise or whatever it is. All of those things contribute to wellness. So I think it's interesting I think it's the same approach and outcome, but it's interesting to look at the beliefs. And there are similarities in beliefs for men and women, generally speaking. That's a very generalised statement. But having worked with mostly women for a really long time, I hear the same stories from women and then the same stories from women about their male partners. And it's really fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And it's funny, as a male, thinking like that. I've just turned 30. I'm looking, going, I need to be better set up. Like hear myself have this narrative in my head. I need to be better set up.
Yeah.
I need to I need to work harder.
Yeah.
I've failed it so much. I need to organize this, and it's this.
Yeah.
And I don't get stressed or anxious about it. It doesn't affect my pain, but every now and again, it sort of.
Yeah.
I worry deeply about it. Commit
it's
more to
biological.
Work, do more, and it is.
It's biological.
There's a protective mechanism within it. I think is like I've got to provide.
Yeah. Yes, that's it. I've got to provide.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's funny though, because I am narrowing the window of opportunity I give myself to exercise. Through my 20s, I never did that.
Yeah.
I've got Excel spreadsheets of my strength training, every rep, every set, every weight recorded for that, and an RPE for that. Like I've done it for 10 years, and for the last 6 months, I've gone away from that.
Yeah.
Is it because I turned 30? Is it because work's ramped up and the business has gotten bigger and we're dealing with big problems? And is it a narrative that I'm just hiding behind it's bigger and more problematic? You know, it's a really interesting thing to think about. Getting my own little therapy session.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
But, and then you go and do the run, or, all right, just don't go on my phone for a day over the Australia Day long weekend. It's like maybe clocked less than an hour of screen time.
Yeah.
And I came back to work on Tuesday on fire.
Yeah.
Felt amazing. And I was like 10 times more productive to provide and fit the narrative I'm worried about anyway. So it was really funny on a personal level. And it's probably a message out there to the men that maybe do worry about this stuff and think about it. At the end of the day, if you let yourself go down that rabbit hole as you're talking about, one, the women and the partners in your life are probably identifying this. It might be affecting your relationship with them. And two, it's probably not actually supporting your productivity.
Yeah.
Which is the main thing you want to be good at.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And that's why I think it's such a missing thing with wellness to look at people's beliefs.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah.
Because we know from the science, how are we more productive? We're more productive when we manage our stress, when we're off our phones, when we get out in nature, when we do a little bit of exercise.
Yeah.
So you just put that little bit in, you're more productive, you bring in more resources, you're supporting your family.
And your health, on a side note, which is a subject going to affect your productivity because you're no good when you're in pain or sick, you're not productive, it's managed.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say run the experiment. Just run the experiment, see what happens.
That's funny. Good. And you can use a science lens.
Yeah.
Particularly in women's health, in your experience, what misconceptions, and I think a lot have been addressed in the last 10 years, evidence and research, as you're saying, is coming, but still what misconceptions exist out there that you still see far too often at the coalface as a practitioner, particularly in relation to women's health?
That our physiology is the abnormal one and that basically we're treated the same way as men, even though like we're small versions of men, to quote Stacey Sims. We need to really take into consideration our female physiology in terms of our fluctuating hormones, which is so different to men. And as you know, when we look at the research, most of it historically has been on men and then just extrapolated to women in terms of health. And it's gaslighting, really, and it's doing such a big disservice. So it is great to see we're starting to get some research for women, but it would be nice to see society set up so that women can work around their cycles and their hormones. Because just like the whole productivity piece, we have phases in our cycle where we're more productive and where maybe we are more sensitive to pain and stress. So that's the time where we should be backing off a little bit and taking it a little bit easier. So I think that is the biggest thing that we need to look at.
From a therapeutic sense, in a rehabilitative state, and also from an exercise prescription sense, is that something you're sort of bringing in more and more? Is there's going to be a cyclical nature to this rehab process, or just this general training process that you're going through?
Yeah, I don't think we've got enough research to be prescriptive
Black and white.
around it.
Okay.
But it's more around being aware of your own cycle and your own cycles in general. You know, your nature, how you respond to things, how much. I probably take it from a bit of a spiritual lens again, and almost think of your physical body as just this avatar that you need to take care of. What does it need? How much sleep does it need? When is it running its best? What are you feeding it? Who are you with? How is it impacted by the different phases of your cycles? Because that then can dictate a lot of the decisions around health, exercise, nutrition, wellness,
Training. Yeah.
all of that.
For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, and that takes that connection to self and embodiment, and actually stopping and noticing, witnessing.
Yeah. And I guess the sort of influence of wearables gives us a bit of that understanding. You know, we had a researcher last week on the episode who specialised in physical activity, and particularly in the influence of sort of tech and wearables on adherence and behaviours. But I think, and again, anecdotally, just people understanding that maybe my HRV is a bit lower, or my resting heart rate's higher, or my body temp's higher at certain phases, particularly female clients, and I'm just not feeling as good.
Yeah.
So tone it down a touch. It doesn't mean zero. And it also doesn't mean you're a failure, that you've turned up last week and your force plate jump and your 5K time is just 5-6% down. You tried your hardest and you just feel flat. So what?
Yeah.
What are you training for? You know,
Yeah.
it's just, and particularly, hopefully 99% of people listening to this are not training to try and win a medal. They're training to feel really good. And you don't need to be at 100% every single time.
Yeah, it's the thing I find fascinating, how many people have wearables, and I do, and they all know their data, but they don't make changes around it.
It's
It's
interesting.
fascinating, isn't it? I didn't sleep well last night. All right, let's go train.
Yeah.
Like, wow, okay.
Anecdotally, do you reckon you could throw a percentage on that, like from what you've seen working with people? This
It's
isn't evidence.
high.
This is-
It's not evidence-based. It's high. It's high. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about myself, and I sometimes go, I'm not looking at my sleep score last night until it's nighttime, because I got a lot of shit to do today, and I know it was a bad sleep. So
Yeah,
it's
and again,
interesting.
it's where, burnout is so prevalent, because when we're constantly pushing beyond our neurobiological limits day after day without providing that recovery, we're going to end up sick. And we see that so much,
Yeah.
particularly midlife, men and women. They get to that point. You can push a lot when you're younger,
Yeah.
like you are, Kieran. But it gets to the point where we just can't recover like we used to.
Yeah.
And that's where it is so important to
Yeah.
have a look at wearables and actually make life adjustments, or if you can't at the time, factor in time when you can recover.
Absolutely. Yeah. How's the little fella doing? Hey,
What are you angry at?
hot. And it's so relevant, and we see it so much. As I said, just anecdotally myself, sometimes just keep pushing. But it is, when you're on that run and you're just not hitting the threshold you want to, or maybe you prescribe for yourself, it's okay.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. Sitting that a little bit lower, and it's more the accumulation of adherence, and it doesn't need to be
Yeah.
hitting at what you prescribed. You've got to listen.
Yeah.
And that's both sides for men and women.
Yeah.
Let's talk about young women. Confidence, resilience. That I think more than ever, the pressure on young women to be extraordinary is really high, and with that, the performance of young women being extraordinary is really high. I don't know really the stats and the data, but young women are outperforming young men a long way. And with some of the young females we worked in here, particularly high school age, the pressure they put on themselves from a physical activity, sport, body image, social adherence, and academic and professional pursuits is it's out of this world. And they're doing it. But underneath that, as you're saying, you're talking about beliefs. I guess when you're working with young women that are in pain, that are putting this pressure on themselves, what are kind of the key components you're looking to address?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say a lot of the young girls I get with pain are the high achievers. Totally, they're the high achievers. And again, it's talking to them about where is that coming from? Like what do you actually want for your life? What are the external, where are the external pressures coming from? You know, is it school, parents? Is there some kind of recognition you're trying to get from someone? Maybe you're not getting enough attention at home. Where is it actually coming from? But then if we look at more the girls that are actually they are really just those exceptional girls that are really good at sport. They're really good at study. They're really good at music. They're just good across the board. It's educating them on having the awareness of their cycles, for example. Are they eating well? So there's no red S kicking in or things like that. So I think, again, there's no black and white answer there.
Yeah.
It's
back to the beliefs, and then that self-awareness is probably the big one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Period positivity is a big part of your work. Why is it important to change the narrative around it? You know, you've mentioned the fluctuations hormonally, when we're feeling our best, when we're not feeling great, particularly for young women going through this sort of phase of life, high school, early stages of university, and early stages of their career. What sort of, I guess, the key factors of understanding it, and then the role models in their life, parents, teachers, mentors at work, how can they help?
I think to answer that last question, in my era and people that are older than me, there was so much period shame, actually. So, I went to an all-girls private school and we would hide menstrual products, to go to the bathroom, which is just insane when you think back to it. So it's nice to see that changing. I know for my daughter, who's in grade 9. Sorry, no, she's not. She's in grade 8. I always get that wrong. Edit that.
Yeah, we'll do that.
I know that they openly talk about it. So it's amazing that has changed and it's needed to change. But it's for them having an understanding of also, we were never taught at our age, and women my age come to physio with no idea of this, but what their hormones actually do beyond their reproductive functions. So even having an awareness of what estrogen and progesterone do for every other organ in their body. So we want girls to grow up having an understanding of actually how amazing they are. So I run programs where I teach girls about the superpowers of their hormones and how incredible they actually are, and how, some athletes that have won marathons on day one of their period and things like that. So it doesn't have to hold you back, but you can make your hormones work for you.
Yeah.
And it's also
really
just
powerful.
Education around, there's still, unfortunately, a lot of girls being prescribed the contraceptive pill at a very young age. So they're actually never experiencing what it's like to cycle. And they're also then not having the benefit of what those hormones are doing for them in terms of, growing peak bone density, growing muscle mass, the impacts on their brain, emotional health. So we have some patients who are coming off the pill at 30, 40 going, oh, wow, this is what it feels like. And to me, that's just devastating that they don't even know what their natural physiology is capable of.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think, as you said, making your hormones work for you is just such a lovely way to put it, and so rare. Very rarely do I, the woman in my life, go, I'm in this phase and smiling about it, or next week that's just coming up, and sort of actually celebrate it and actually incorporate it into how they're living their life.
Yeah.
We're very routine, regimented, and structured, but it doesn't mean, I guess, our adherence, excitement, whatever else it might be, can flow with that. And as you said, I think taking that step back, observing it, making a note, and then leveraging off that, because it's going to be subjective. It's not going to be like, on week 3, every female feels like this. It's like, you might be different, and that's okay as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really important message.
Absolutely.
For the men listening to this, and I really want to put an emphasis on this, and I've said it a number of times. I think for males, the most visceral behavior a man can give is when the woman in their life, and this is generalizing, speaking for myself really, is affected, in danger, whatever it might be. Like if someone does something to the woman in my life, frontal lobe will switch off and I'll act like an animal to protect them.
Yeah.
And as I said, there's all those narratives and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I think there's so much, if we look at it through a lens of like, think about the woman in your life as a man listening to this. What can we do?
I think again is just have awareness of the fluctuating state of our hormones, and then specifically the women in your life, particularly an intimate partner, obviously,
Yep.
so that you can support her through those phases. Like, what are the phases where she maybe needs some quieter time, or maybe even time away in her own little cave where you won't get yelled at.
Yeah.
Just offering support. It's going to be opening communication with her. Like, what do you need at the moment? Just lines like that. How can I support you at the moment?
Yep.
Simple question
Really
like
simple.
that. Yeah. Instead of trying to read their mind, but that's up to women as well to be able to ask for what they need.
Yes.
And that's another skill.
And also, I think verbalize how they're feeling.
Yeah. So providing safety around that it's safe to verbalize how they're feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say, and this sounds murky and grey, and I think some people want to be strictly professional, but I think in a workplace setting, in a coaching setting, be it school, performance athletes, high performance athletes, there's males in leadership roles where they have to manage females. And there's a line there in terms of work is work and get the outcome, and sometimes it's probably a compromise. And, risks a successful career for a talented individual in any capacity, sport, professionally. I guess what considerations can be brought to them, if anything?
Yeah, it is tough, but I think it's just, again, why is it a stigma? It's just our body, right?
Yeah.
So it's such a fascinating question when you actually come back to what it is. It's just how our physiologies are working.
Yeah.
Why can't we talk about it like that?
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, in setting up our women's health program, which kicks off early Feb, I've been sitting in a room with 4 or 5 females that have helped coordinate this whole thing. 1, it's been hilarious. 2, the productivity levels, I'm like blown away. I've honestly, and again, anecdotal, but females just getting stuff done, making it look pretty, making it really attractive. And not only for females, but for males, we've had other stuff done involved. But then at the same time, because it's a women's health program, and in the program, it's all this sort of conversation. Some of the women are like, guys, I'm going to jump on a Zoom call today. I'm not coming in for that meeting. I'm day 2 of my period. And it's just sweet. It's fun. And it makes, from a professional setting, makes it so easy. Call gets done, work gets done better than I can even imagine. And everyone's happy, and we laugh about it and just say, okay, like, you get that space, and it's almost acceptable. And at the end of the day, the productivity, the work, it's been extraordinary from my side, and the team's done such a wonderful job. But not as hard and not as professionally compromising, I think, is the big thing I'd like to use. Is it's just a space of, hey, like, I'm still going to do the work, but I just need this space because I'm not feeling at this level. So it's been interesting for me to see that and learn that.
Yeah. And sometimes that's all women need, just to know that they can say that. There's nothing else you need to do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or even then ask, what does that mean for you? I'm day 2. Or what does that mean for you? As in, what can I do to help you today then? Or what changes do you need to make?
What works better?
How do we accommodate that?
Yeah. And in a professional setting, I think there's, silver linings in everything. And one of the big ones from COVID is we can be productive without having to go into an office and present a certain way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. I think, if we sort of consider this conversation for a second, we've gone and touched everywhere from spirituality to psychology to neurology to hormones to musculoskeletal and everything else. For the person who's listening to this and suddenly come across a Stacey Sims podcast or something like that, and they're just like, oh my God, there's so much. Where do they start? How can they simply just start turning the wheel in a positive motion so that they're feeling really, I guess, excited about embodying a bit more of a healthy lifestyle, whatever other, I suppose, mechanisms of motivation they have. Where does someone start?
I think it's a matter of scaling right out and just sitting and asking yourself, how actually am I? Instead of, like you said, going about your routine. This is what I do on a Monday. This is what I do on a Tuesday. Just actually sitting and going, how am I?
Do I need to be a runner?
Absolutely. Yeah. What symptoms do I have? Where do I not feel well in my life?
Interesting.
Things like that.
Yeah.
And what changes can I make that can move me towards wellness? Or if you're not feeling in a well state, when was the last time I was feeling well? Because things like relationships, workplaces can impact your wellness.
Big time.
So I think it's important to regularly sit and check in on things like that. And it might mean making big decisions.
Yeah, because that's the sort of the next step. It's being brave enough to confront.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I guess in terms of finding a support network to be able to make a big decision.
Yeah.
There might be a lot of people, particularly females, listening to this where they're staring at a big decision, but feel like if they make it, they've got nothing behind them to support them. I guess, what can they do?
Yeah, I always think it's important to set up your own safety net. So we're talking about this in our pelvic pain program. Actually, we're running a beautiful 9-week pelvic pain program. And it's a beautiful healing journey. And not the first step, but on the first day, one of the questions is, who can you put in your support network throughout this journey that you're about to embark on? So that might be friends, family, it might be a GP, it might be health professionals, might be a coach, the people that are genuinely there to support your wellness. And on the flip side of that, who isn't supportive of that for whatever reason? Or who is keeping me attached to a particular identity I'm trying to shift away from? Who will it sort of trigger a bit if I actually make these changes towards wellness? Because we're not complaining about the same things anymore. We're making big changes. So I think all of that is really important.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have a combination of paid people to support you if you can, and unpaid people. I think that's really important to have both.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's stick on the unpaid people. How can someone potentially identify this person's coming to me to play this role? Big decision or not coming, but, I think a lot of us misinterpret, maybe underestimate that we do play that role for someone. And then someone just goes, and they avoid making a big life decision that could really impact their health, their pain, whatever situation they're in, because they feel like there's no one else in the person that I thought was supporting was me, and they're not there. Yeah, I guess, are there any things that people can identify? And you've obviously professionally played that role for a lot of people. How does it exist, and what does it look like?
I think it's people, again, this is the conversation we started with, it's people who will sit and just listen to you. So we all know people that you'll be in conversation and they talk and talk and talk and talk. It's got to be people who will do the opposite. They'll actually sit and listen, but also not be afraid to ask you hard questions, which might be the questions that make you think about the big tough things in your life. Do you need boundaries from your parents? Is that relationship actually serving you now? Is that job something you need to look at? Those big decisions that massively impact wellness, pain, all of those things. And a good friend is someone that can ask those questions in a compassionate way.
Yeah.
That's important too.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as a health professional supporting people, it's really important to not be attached to any outcome.
That's easy to say.
Yeah.
As
that's
a professional
a skill.
that tends to get attached to outcomes. Yeah.
It's a skill.
Yeah. I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people that listen to this are practitioners in some sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And as you said, sitting there and listening.
Yeah.
As a practitioner, sometimes all we have to do.
Yeah.
And the evidence on that is emerging stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah. And as you said, it's allowing the person in front of you to lead their own wellness journey. You know, we can be there to listen and support them with all of the information we have, but it's allowing them to have agency.
And giving them the tools.
Yeah.
Because it's theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't matter how much we give and try and diagnose and what they
Yeah.
take and everything else. It's theirs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Paula, amazing. I don't think I've had a conversation, at least on this podcast, that has encompassed everything so much. And you've got a really amazing story, personally, professionally, and you've brought it all together. And that's a brave thing to do, I think. It's a really special thing to do. So I have no doubt the effect and the influence you're having on your patients and a wider spectrum of people is pretty special. So, you know, I guess on their behalf, thank you for doing that. And thank you for jumping on today. And again, being so vulnerable and sharing your story. And it's inspiring and it's motivating. I live for work and I don't look at work as work. I just think this is a sort of responsibility I have. It's something that I've chosen to do and I love doing it. I don't want to do anything else. And, you know, it sort of oozes out of you too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, really special. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. We'll get you on again soon. Cheers.
Thank you.